Philip Lewis, it's my colleague Mark Sturgis, and we are the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the Northampton Local Plan Part 2. This is the second day of hearings which form part of our examination of the plan. And before we continue with our discussion this morning, I'll very briefly run through some procedural and housekeeping points. Firstly, I just want to check that people have got their electronic devices, phones, etc. switched to silent. And just to check that the webcast is operational.
You would have said, yeah.
Yeah, good, thank you. Okay, given that it's ourselves and the council participants, I don't think we need to run through the fire procedures, etc. We'll probably just follow you. So, do we have any other housekeeping points that we need to discuss arising from yesterday?
I don't think so, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to matter 3, which is provision for gypsies, travellers and travelling show people. And we have joining us today via Teams, Mr. Jarman, who's working with the council. It would be helpful, I think, to start with introductions, so the council can introduce those people that have participated today.
Okay.
And we'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, my name's Paul Everard and I'm the Planning Policy and Heritage Manager for the Northampton area of West Northamptonshire Council.
Simon Bird QC providing legal support.
Amanda Jacobs, sorry.
Okay.
Amanda Jacobs, West Northamptonshire Council.
Noreen Banks, Planning Policy Team Leader for West Northamptonshire Council.
Richard Wood, West Northamptonshire Council.
And so Mr. Jarman is online
Yes.
from ORS, who were responsible for preparing the TANs in 2017.
Good morning, Mr. Jarman.
Good morning. Apologies, I can't be there in person. I've got COVID at the moment and they won't let me out till next week.
Well, as long as you're okay, we are in these interesting times at the moment, and yes, we weren't thinking about necessarily running a blended event, but I'm very pleased that that's been possible to do at short notice. It was always there in our armoury if we needed to, people couldn't attend, and the programme officer did invite potential participants if they to reveal any issues they have with attending, and no one said anything. So very pleased we're able to do this. We may need to do it again, hopefully not, but we will see. We'll see. Okay, we also have, not in the room at the moment, we have with us the programme officer, Mr. Kemp, who is the main point of contact for us during the examination. Okay, so move on to matter 3. You will have seen that we have posed a number of questions in our MIQs in relation to the provision for gypsy travellers and travelling show people. And we've discussed yesterday that the strategic policy in the joint course strategy in respect of gypsy travellers and travelling show people is proposed to be superseded by a policy in the plan before us. The purpose of our questions, and what I think we'll do is run through them again today, is so that we have a clear picture of the need for and the existing provision for gypsies and travellers within the plan area, whether they meet the planning definition set out in national policy or not, so that we can take that away and give some thought to whether the plan will be sound as submitted or whether it would need to make some further modifications to it. Okay, so it's really about exploring these matters and helping us to understand what the present position is. So start with our first question we posed, and it's in relation to the survey work that's been undertaken in January 2017, and we particularly asked whether it's an up-to-date assessment given it's dated 2017 and it's 2021 now. Not necessarily questioning the methodology of that, I think we will come back to how unknowns are dealt with in terms of calculating need later on. I think useful at this point if the council and or Mr. Jarman could just explain the context for the updated survey, how it seeks to move things on from what was in the core strategy, and broadly what its findings are.
Thank you, sir. I think it's best if Mr. Jarman talks to us on that matter.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. It's quite worrying seeing me up on those big screens there, but I was at a hearing in Maidstone a couple of weeks ago, and I was on a 40-foot screen covering the entire side of the council chamber. In terms of the most up-to-date West Northampton travel needs study, it was completed by ORS late 2016 through to 2017. Touched on the methodology. The methodology has been found sound in Daventry and South Northampton through examination, and it's exactly the same approach that was taken. It was a joint report across the whole of the former West Northamptonshire local authorities. As far as the household interviews are concerned, there's a large public site where we were able to complete interviews with the majority of the residents, and at the time there was a small, it's recorded as an unauthorised site in the assessment, but essentially it was a longer term unauthorised encampment that was known by the traveller manager for Northampton at the time, and the understanding was that he was actively working with them to seek to find some permanent accommodation to meet that need.
Okay, do you know how long that site's been in existence? You may not, but just think about its potential planning status.
We're aware of a further unauthorised site, but that's only come to light and been established following the completion of the GTAA or the TNA.
Okay, so there's two unauthorised sites. One is fairly recent, within the last couple of years, and you said that the one you mentioned first of all. Do you have any indication of how long that may have been there? 10 years, 15 years, 5 years, or whatever? It was an established encampment that has been within Northampton for a relatively long period of time, that is known to the council and the traveller manager, and for whatever reasons it wasn't possible to accommodate this individual on the public site. Right. I'm just wondering, in terms of its planning status, if it's effectively a tolerated site, and it may be one that's been in existence long enough for someone to seek to regularise its lawfulness. If it's just one of those situations, is it beyond the period for enforcement? You may not have the answer to that now, but just really interested to help us picture. I think it was deemed inappropriate to be considered as far as tolerated for planning purposes, lawful in terms of its accommodation duration, because it was for all intents and purposes an unauthorised encampment. Right, okay. Moving around to a certain extent. It wasn't what I would class as a sort of a permanent site without planning permission. Yeah, that's helpful, thank you. As far as the planning definition is concerned, on that, the GTAA sets out, sorry, I will keep referring to it as a GTAA because that's what I'm more familiar with. Yes, fine, so the assessment sets out the various case law that we considered into the definition in various inspectors' decisions at examination and at appeal, and has determined that in order to meet the PPTS planning definition, household members need to demonstrate they travel for work purposes or for seeking work and stay away from their usual place of residence for a reasonable period of time. So as a result of those questions that were asked, we were able to determine that there were no households that were interviewed in Northampton that met the planning definition. This is very common in areas that are predominantly characterised by larger public sites. Across the country, we regularly find that there are no or very few residents on public sites that meet the planning definition. Yeah. I think we were going to discuss the unknown, or as I refer to now, undetermined households, and what it relates to agenda items. But I'm confident that assessment against the planning definition was completed robustly. Okay, so in terms of what the council set out in the statement, so we have two unauthorised, let's call them sites or encampments at the moment in Northampton. There's an element of need that may arise from the undetermined unknowns, because we don't know about the status of those people. But there's also, outside of the definition, there are there's a need for a number of households, I think it's 17, that don't meet the definition but might fall within the ethnic classifications of gypsies, Irish travellers, etc.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay.
Could I just and the other issue was about the age of the survey as well,
Yes.
wasn't it? So I don't know if Mr. John has more to say on that.
So, yeah, just interested on your views on the currency of the survey, given that we are aware that there's going to be a West Northamptonshire wide survey that's been commissioned, so I guess will be underway surveys next year, but I don't know. Interested to know about that.
We had a discussion with the officers and council yesterday. I think that if we were in another part of West Northamptonshire, we might be having a very different discussion about this. But because the population in Northampton, as far as the GTAA is concerned, the vast majority were living on a public site, then I'm far more confident, given the very low accepted turnover rates on that site, that the likelihood is that the residents that were on the site now are the residents that were on the site when we completed the interviews in January 2017.
Okay.
And that the needs that were identified would still be relatively the same. The majority of need that was identified was from teenage children, who may now be young adults, but will still contribute in the same way towards that need, and from new household formation from the younger children living on the site, who, in my view, having looked at the demographics, are still not in a position to be needing pictures of their own within the first 5-year period of the plan allocations.
Do we know if there's any crossover between the waiting list for that site and some of these, I'll just call them emerging households, I wouldn't go as far as say hidden households, so we don't know what they are. I'm just wondering whether some of the household generation that may be coming from this site, from the undetermined, could actually be reflected in the waiting list on the site. Or could it be for other traveller families that are not otherwise provided for?
I'm just reviewing the data now from the interviews that were completed, and we do actually ask if there were any households that were interviewed where young adults living within families, doubled up households, concealed households were on the waiting list in terms of identifying any double counting, and looking through, I think there were 3 that were on the waiting list and 3 or 4 who said that when their teenagers come of age, they would like to be putting them on the waiting list. So the likelihood is that the figure from the waiting list for 9 pitches or from 9 households is likely to reflect a proportion of that current need arising from the site, as opposed to new need from people living off site. There was also no indication from speaking with the travel manager that any of the other households, in his view, were in need of a pitch. Some were living in bricks and mortar and had more of a desire to move to a site. And it's felt that even though the turnover rate is relatively low, pitches do become available and meet the needs of households that are on the waiting list as they arise. So as such, it was felt that there was no need to fall component need arising from that waiting list, because a waiting list, in my view, unless it's significant in the numbers of households with relatively zero turnover, is a list that you wait on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So in terms of the overall picture of things that may or may not indicate need, so we have two families that are, two households existing on, I'll call them unauthorised sites, but to take your explanation as what they are. Potentially one household arising from, within the definition from undetermined, and there's the current waiting list of 9, which actually reflects some of the 17 potentially that are not meeting the need. Is that correct?
As far as my understanding is concerned, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
What we also need to consider here, and this again is a discussion that I've been having with West Northamptonshire and the new North Northamptonshire local authority, is that at the time of the assessments, because I did both areas, we were dealing with individual districts and boroughs.
Yeah.
And as is often the case, Northampton is a very sort of defined urban area with little opportunity for land for sites and a lot of competition in terms of the wider housing need. Now we have a new unitary authority covering West Northamptonshire. The council do now have opportunities moving forward to seek to meet some of the needs within the wider West Northamptonshire area. We're having a similar discussion, as I said, with North Northampton, where all of the need is from the former Kettering borough,
Yeah.
and all of the supply is from the former Wellingborough borough. And they are now commissioning us to do some work to seek to look at the spatial distribution of supply and demand across the new unitary authority. I think that West Northamptonshire are looking to do a similar exercise, albeit with a different consultant that's been commissioned to complete their new assessment of need.
Okay, so two more things I want to explore. There's so to start maybe with the potential in Northampton for providing additional pitches. I've obviously not been to the Ecton Lane site, but from what I've read, is there any scope there at all for providing additional pitches at that site, or is it at effective capacity?
My understanding is, sir, is that it's at effective capacity, but I know Mr. Jarman will probably have had a view from when he did the survey work as well.
My view, given the fact that we did identify need rising from the site on some concealed adults and some teenagers who will now be in need of their own, is that the site there, as is operating at pretty much full capacity, and it's a large site as well.
Yeah.
But that said, the need for some of the teenagers could be met through the council considering allowing additional touring caravans on some of the pitches, for example, as opposed to full pitches, including a mobile day room, tour, etc. Because the needs for sort of single adults and teenagers don't necessarily equate to what you would consider to be a full gypsy and traveller pitch.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would that work in terms of its current licensing and any consenting arrangements? Look at the council really. Maybe that's a question to take away and see how feasible that might be.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. That didn't some of these questions are posed. So I don't necessarily expect responses now.
No. Okay.
Yeah, because that's the first. The first point of that is that we need to explore: can capacity be increased to meet some of the need on the site in a way that would be acceptable and provide appropriate living conditions? Obviously, the second question is that along that, is it feasible for the site to be extended in size, or indeed desirable? There are two different questions there. With larger traveller sites, it may not be indeed desirable to do that, but is that possible? And given its location, etc., would that be consistent with planning policy for traveller sites? Again, that's just in principle. Is that something that is feasible, or is it something we can say is not feasible? And
it wouldn't be consistent with the PPS simply on size grounds because it's already well in excess of the 15. But and then obviously there may be other factors, but
I think the site is. My understanding is the site is fairly constrained.
Yeah. What I can see of it from sort of Google Maps, it does appear to. Just whether there is any configuration that will allow for greater occupancy along the lines Mr. Jarman has suggested, whether that would need any additional land to create bigger pitch spaces to accommodate extended families. But that may not be feasible. You may end up with the same number of pitches, but they would be effectively larger pitches to accommodate greater amounts of accommodation in terms of touring caravans or whatever. And that may go into
I think that's a discussion that could be had, because looking at the occupancy, there do appear to be a number of extended family groups on the site.
Yeah.
And in those circumstances, there could be opportunities for sort of partial reconfiguration of some parts of the site to potentially reduce the number of day rooms to allow for sort of shared extended family amenity facilities and a large number of caravans. Not knowing anything about the land ownership to the east and the southeast of the site, there does appear to be land that could be available for extensions moving forward.
Yeah.
There's certainly very little conflict with settled housing because it's all to the south of the A45 with a large sort of sewage treatment works, household recycling centre and industrial uses to the south and the east. But as I said, I mean, I think Northampton was struggling to identify land, but within a wider West Northamptonshire capacity now, there may be further opportunities to seek to meet the need elsewhere.
Yeah, but what I think it's useful to explore that because there does appear to be some fairly immediate need, and we're talking about a relatively short-term policy. We'll come on to the sort of duration of the policy. So there's that sort of issue of immediate need. The longer-term need will be considered elsewhere, and it maybe the solution will be found elsewhere within the wider plan area. Or just before we move on to that, am I right in understanding from the call for sites there were no suggestions for sites put forward for traveller sites, gypsy traveller sites in Northampton?
That's correct, sir. Yes.
And the council aren't aware of any sites that you could otherwise, you've identified potentially to allocate, given on a basis. Okay. That's helpful. So moving on to the policy itself, the intention is that this would be a strategic policy. We know from the framework that strategic policy should look forward 15 years of adoption. The evidence base that supports this policy runs until 2031, which is actually beyond the end of the plan period, so it goes slightly beyond. But clearly it isn't going to run until 15 years beyond adoption, which is maybe 37,
yeah,
I imagine. but we know for reasons why. The council is committed to undertake a new assessment as part of its new plan.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's been commissioned and consultants appointed.
So we need really to take away that would it be justified to include a strategic policy that wouldn't run for 15 years of adoption, though would run to the end of the plan period, on the basis that it's going to be reviewed as part of the new council-wide plan and be done in a similar way, I suppose, to the previous or the original survey for joint core strategy that was done on the joint core strategy area. So that's something we need to take away and think about how it work. It would be helpful if the council could give some thought to the feasibility of providing additional accommodation for extended families within that site, the Ecton Lane site. Is that feasible, desirable, etc.? Can it actually be done in terms of licensing restrictions and everything else? Can that be done? And if so, how will it be delivered? Because it would need to be funded, of course, in some way or another. But in terms of the plan, there could be a main modification that would include a scheme to increase pitch sizes to accommodate demand arising from that.
Yes.
But as it's a public site, I think we would, as opposed to a private site, we may need some evidence on whether that was actually be feasible
Yes, sir.
and whether it could be delivered. And then we can form a view on really how to go forward from there. Because there's a question of the need for those people that don't meet the definitions of that national policy, but could be ethnic gypsies and Irish travellers. So how is a plan? So how is a plan at the moment? So how is a plan seeking to meet the needs of those people? Given there's 17 pitches identified for those.
What?
And we lost Mr. Jarman.
Yeah.
We can wait for Mr. Jarman to come back in if you like. Mr. Jarman's back.
Essentially, it's the criteria-based policy.
Mm.
That's how it will be dealt with. So.
And so, can we have any comfort that there is actually potential for schemes to come forward within the Northampton borough area? Because there seems to be a consistent level of demand at the public site and no planning applications. Is there actually potential for this to happen, or would there be in effect continuing unmet need?
Obviously, we'd if there was any interest, we'd encourage a planning application that follows the criteria-based policy.
In terms of consideration of the qualities, what's the approach to the plan? Say, between people that reside in caravans and people that reside in bricks and mortar housing, is that consistent, given that allocations have been made to meet need for bricks and mortar type housing? I'm just...
Yeah, I think the answer is...
I think I need to explore
yes,
some
it's a perfectly fair
policy
question,
considerations.
and the answer is yes, but of course you're dealing here with we've been referring to them as known unknowns, so Mr. Jarman has a different term for them, but effectively that's the position we're at. These are not people who necessarily are in need of a pitch. Their needs may presently be perfectly acceptably met by other forms of accommodation, and it's not possible to determine what level of need would actually crystallise into a requirement for a pitch. And the approach the council's taken here is consistent with the approach taken elsewhere. I know Mr. Jarman referred to the London case, where the criteria-based approach is the accepted means of addressing this. I call it an identified need, but of course it's an unidentified need to an extent. I don't know whether Mr. Jarman has anything he wants to add to that.
I don't think so, to be honest, but I think what the council need to be aware of is that whilst there is the right from the public side, a large proportion of that need is back-ended towards the latter part of the plan period from younger children and from teenagers. And as we've already discussed, the need to be in the short to medium term may not necessarily be for a full pitch of their own. And I think we've already asked the council to go back and sort of consider what options there are to meet this need on the public side, and also what options there are in other parts of West Northamptonshire.
Okay, so that will deal with some of the short-term need arising on that site. Then leave